Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Healing Conversations. And this week I have a new guest who's a dear friend of mine, and it's Lanna. And she is a relationship and embodiment coach, and she lives in the Peruvian Andes. And she channels the wisdom of plants, mountains, and ancestors in her sessions and ceremonies. And in this conversation, we'll dive a lot deeper into her work and a lot more. But first of all, thank you, Lana, for taking up the time and space for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, first of all, so you're also an embodiment coach, and I know this is something you go really deeply into with your work. So for people who are kind of new to it, so what does embodiment kind of mean to you, and how would you define it? Um,
That's a really great question. Embodiment, it's in the word itself, there is definition being in the body. So, meaning feeling what's going on in your body, sensations, emotions, physical aspect of it. Oftentimes in our current world, the way we are, we spend a lot of time in our heads, we think a lot, and we in a way it almost feels like we're floating above, like we're floating above and maybe thinking a lot and don't notice our physical experience, don't notice our physical needs. Some people I work with, the things they talk about is like, oh, I forget to eat, or I forget to go to the bathroom, until it's like really really bad. They have low blood sugar, for example. So
mm,
that's an example of being disembodied, being out in the head too much. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, great. So it's really about kind of living in your body, being really aware of also your physical needs and feeling like
Mm-hmm.
the different sensations that are there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Mm, So what was for you? Is there something that has really changed your relationship with your body and really got you kind of into this work deeper, like something specific that inspired you?
Yes, definitely my own experience. I grew up in a very unsafe environment, and which caused me to leave my body because it was not safe. It was not safe to be in the body. It was not safe to experience all the sensations and all the feelings. It was too much. And the brain would get overwhelmed. Our system gets overwhelmed, and that's why we leave our bodies.
Hmm.
And I remember as a teenager and early 20s, I would feel like my life is a movie, like I'm just observing from above. And I had no idea. I thought it's normal. I thought that everyone is experiencing life like that. And I remember going through some materials from like psychology and from people who are investigating, like emotions and inner child work. And that's what I learned. Okay, if you're experiencing life as it feels like it's a movie, or it feels like you are observing everything, it's a symptom of being dissociated, disembodied. And that's when I started looking into that. And it was a coincidence. It wasn't really planned by me. But who knows. I was I went into sports really deeply. I started cycling, swimming, running. I was preparing for a triathlon, and I was training every day for 6 hours. And of course, when we do things that are really, really physical, that brings us into our body, whether we want it or not, because we move the body, we have to be aware of, energy levels and like food and things like that. And that triggered a whole chain of events where I started having flashbacks. And maybe something that you already know is we store a lot of emotions and memories and traumas in the body. So it was interesting that I started coming into the body, not intentionally at that time, and these pockets of memories started to come to the surface. And that's when I was pushed really because it was very intense emotionally. I
Mhm.
was pushed to find a therapist and start working and start processing things that were coming up. And because of that, embodiment is something I see as a huge part of healing, a huge part of feeling alive, in this life, and getting healthy and getting to know yourself and having better relationships, even. Yeah.
Yeah. And first of all, really thank you for sharing that, because I feel like um our relationship with our body can really reflect the relationship we have to ourselves, and especially to our like physical earthly life of what it really is. And I feel like when we live a lot in our head, we can kind of escape a lot of the emotions and a lot of like the memory that is stored there, because I think we have a big misconception that memory is only stored in the brain, but actually we're now finally discovering more and more. Also, a lot of it is supported by scientific research now, that memory is actually stored within our body. And actually, our
Mm-hmm.
body, when we actually allow ourselves to feel it, it signals to the brain, instead of that
Yes.
the brain is just a place where it's stored, but actually it's more like an intermediate, like a way that we communicate, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of communicates the memory, but the actual memory is inside the body. And also even memory beyond our personal memory, even like ancestral memory. um, so it goes actually pretty deep when we really look into it. um, and I feel like, especially when we, through sports, but also I've had many times like clients or friends told me, like through sometimes even through massages or things like that, when actually um and it's what we call a trigger, right? So actually it's something within ourselves, either physically, or it can also be just more mentally and emotionally, but usually it's very linked, kind of gets activated again. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like that memory is there, but because we're unaware of it, it's kind of like a sleep. And it can
Mm-hmm.
almost be like the memory wakes up. So, for example, if we would say like we're in a situation where something like that happens, so either through someone touching you, or you're actually moving your body and something gets activated, and you just shared about also seeking external help in that process, right? The therapist. So, what is it that we can do when that happens? So when that trigger, that memory gets activated.
Yeah. I love this question. So up my alley. um, One thing to remember that the stored memory or emotion is energy. Like it got locked in the body, maybe in fascia or in muscles or in any other tissue, sometimes even in bone marrow. And we can use breath to move that energy. And it's important, really, really important, not to go into the head again, because that's what we do. If we start thinking and trying to figure it out and trying to push it away, we kind of go into that spiral of being stuck with that energy. And there's almost like this dance of like, oh, I want to release it, but I'm resisting it, but I want to for it to stop, but what do I do? And actually, when we do that, we feed it more energy almost in some way. And that's why I mean, I have been there as well myself, where we kind of get stuck in that heavy place. Um, we could call it depression, we could call it dark night of the soul, that lasts for a year for some people. But it's because we are mm, almost like we touch that memory and then we leave, we go into our head and start thinking too much. So it's really helpful to use the breath. And if you start breathing slower and deeper and focusing on that sensation, you don't even have to do anything else for it to move. And of course, it depends on what kind of memory, what kind of trauma it is. A lot of things are quite mild. There are if you breathe and you focus on it and you give yourself time to process it, you can do that by yourself, you know. But I've been working with a lot of people who've gone through really heavy trauma, and external help sometimes is needed, specifically for that reason, to not go into the head. When I work with people, what I do is I kind of remind them to, okay, let's keep breathing, let's keep feeling. We don't have to figure it out. We don't have to know why. And all of those answers actually they come later. You know, they everything becomes clearer like once we process. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I really love that answer. So how would you identify like trauma? How would you describe trauma for people? Because it can mean a lot of different things to different people. Yeah.
Trauma, to me, and I mean, of course, people have different definitions, but to me, it's nervous system getting overwhelmed and not being able to cope with the current situation, whatever it is. And so, what happens in that moment, it almost freezes that situation, and we kind of compartmentalize, and we store this in our body. The memory itself, the visual, the audio part of it, the smell, the emotion. And because the body is wise, right? So those traumas, they come up later when we are actually able, maybe able to process them better, right? But that's what we call trigger. Trigger actually triggers one of the components of trauma. And most of the time, it's an emotional trigger, you know, especially in relationships. I think everyone can relate to that. And when someone says something or does something or doesn't do something and makes us feel a certain way, like, okay, I feel abandoned, or I feel hurt, or I feel this and this and that. And a lot of the time, it's not even related, you know, to current situation. It's a trigger coming up from the past because this situation happened before with someone who actually was supposed to be there, typically parents or caretakers, teachers sometimes. And we weren't able to cope, and it got kind of like frozen in time, that situation. And of course, the intensity can be different, and for everyone, it's different. It's a different situation. Like different situations can have different impact, right? So for some people, it's that situation when my, like, let's say mom didn't give candy to a child, and that was just too much to handle. Too much. It just caused such distress that in that moment the actual child got traumatized. You know. And for others, it could be something really violent happen. You know. So it's not to say that certain situation is more traumatizing than others. You know, it really depends how, like, where the person's nervous system is. And I've seen also in my own experience, because I went through such a very unsafe, violent childhood, there was things that were happening maybe when I was 7 or 8 that for someone they would be extremely traumatizing. For me, it was like, yeah, whatever, because my system was already so traumatized, like it wasn't even noticing, you know, those situations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like it's really good that you mentioned that it's also really about the personal experience, right? So it can be that, for example, in a household that you have siblings that for certain siblings it is a way they're way more traumatized by certain situations or certain family dynamics and the other because we all have our own unique perception, right? So it can be that we're in the same situation and one person feels extremely powerless in a situation, which often is a very strong imprint with traumatic experiences. We feel powerless to resolving it. So we kind of cut off from it because we're unable to deal with it in that moment. But maybe another person is able to handle that in that moment. And what you mentioned is also something else, is that when we experience something over and over and over and over again, it's kind of like even our system is so highly intelligent, it kind of gets used to the situation. And often so it kind of is able to, our mind is very intelligent, so it's able to predict certain behaviors, um, to basically prevent us from getting more traumatized. And I feel like usually the situations that kind of um, kind of leave us with a trauma which has a very strong imprint that kind of continues to influence us, or even way after the event happened, is where there's a very strong unpredictability. Yeah. Um, so can you also share a little bit of your experience, because you've experienced like a lot of trauma, right? And of course, it's always relative, right? But it is very beautiful to see that someone like you has been able to really go through this process of really integrating that trauma and really coming to a place of health. And this doesn't mean like perfect balance, never experiencing these heavy things, but kind of in a way of that you can really live your and enjoy life, and also do work that you love doing, and all these different things, which not everyone who's been through those extreme experiences is able to. Um, so could you share a little bit of what that process, and of course there's a lot to it, but that process of you was kind of like, of going at the moment that you already shared, of that you started seeking more external help because a lot of it was getting triggered, to kind of the point where you're at right now? What was that process like? Um, and of course, it's a long journey, but yeah.
Yes, yes. I'm like, oh wow, okay. Do you have like 10 hours?
Yeah.
There's of course a lot to talk about. There are a lot of components, but I would say one of the most important things were realizing that I need help. And that was a very humbling moment, because the way my mom brought me up was, you do everything by yourself, you're strong, you're self sufficient, you don't need anyone. Because that's how she grew up, and of course she passed it over to me. So it took me a really long time to come to this place of, well, yeah, I actually need help. And I'm going to ask people and friends and therapists, right? And from there, also realizing how the nervous system works. So when trauma occurs, it actually impedes the development of nervous system. We have a lot of people nowadays like walking around in adult bodies with a 2 years old nervous system. And that's when we see, adult people having a really childish behavior. Not in, I'm not I don't want to say childish in like a judgmental way, but they're acting not responsibly, basically, right? And that's really just because of that, because the nervous system is not capable to hold space for us to show up as adults in daily life, in work, in relationships especially. It gets really, really brought up in relationships. And so I went in and out relationships for a few years. And what kept happening is I kept going into finding that primary attachment bond within the romantic relationship. And we need that, like on a healing journey. We need that primary attachment figure to be there for us and to mirror to us in a positive way that we are okay, you know. And a healthy way to do that is if you have a therapist that you see every week or even maybe twice a week. Who's that for you? You know, it's giving you that mirroring constantly. And then it's possible, of course, to do it within a romantic relationship, but the level of awareness and knowledge about these dynamics has to be really, really advanced, right? Because it's so easy to get into a spiral of blaming and, you know, you owe me this and you should do this and why didn't you do that, you know, and it's not healthy for either people. So yeah, learning that I really have to prioritize my needs and nourish myself every day. I think also we get into this kind of mentality around um, giving to ourselves that, okay, I'm gonna do this and then it's done. And it doesn't work like that. It has to be consistent. Like if we are doing, let's say, what's nourishing for me is to do a yoga practice. It's not that I do it for like 1 week or 1 month and then I'm done. It has to be practice. That's why it's called practice, right? And same thing with any other way of self care, massages, any kind of activities that make you feel relaxed, nourished, good food. Yeah. So focusing on that self care, nourishment, and receiving, you know, receiving that mirroring, receiving that attention, because that's what we didn't get. That's why we got traumatized. Is that the 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 situation was so intense and so overwhelming, and we were alone in it. That's why we couldn't cope. So for all the parents out there, like most likely there will be situations where you hurt the child. Like it's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. But as parents, and I'm not a parent myself yet. We I'm a parent to my inner child. You know, I
Mhm.
think that's where I learned all my parenting tools and ideas and whatnot. But it's almost like we have to be there and present through this intensity and make sure there's recovery, remedy, you know, and reestablishment of connection. That's important. And this way, um, with a child, or with a friend, or with a partner, you know, it's important in all relationships. This way, we are not making the situation like stuck in our bodies, and we can move on and continue. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like what's also really important, and you mentioned it, I think, a few times, is also consistency.
Mm-hmm.
That is very essential in the healing process with whatever we do. So either with a practice, but also working with someone when we kind of want to actually change these patterns and heal these traumas, is to also to allow ourselves to have that opposite experience, because like I said, with trauma often comes a lot of unpredictability,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially in a relationship. And of course it would be beautiful if we would able to also change and shift that in romantic relationships or close friendships, which of course is possible. But it can become more challenging area too, because there's a lot of projection there. So we can like project, for example, like one of our parents on our partner. And also
Mm-hmm.
that we tend to, and I think especially in the beginning process of the healing experience, that we intend to attract people with similar qualities or similar like characteristics, um, that were kind of also dysfunctional for us in our childhood, to that we also tend to attract that in our early romantic relationships. So that's why we can easily get stuck there. And I feel like when we work, like I said, someone who's not directly linked into our life, so who's not really like attached to our life or our results. So it's kind of a like separate safe space. um, we can actually shift those patterns and heal those emotional wounds and integrate that trauma a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
And still, it can be like a longer period of time that you're working with someone, so that you also have that consistency, so that you feel supported in your process. And a lot of things do take time. You know, of course, we all wish that a lot of healing it happens overnight, and that from for example, fearing, even so, sometimes it can also be fearing commitment or fearing intimacy, fearing relationship in the first place. And of course, we wish that within a few sessions or within a few months, we're able to shift that. But some of these deep rooted patterns also take a longer time, and that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like having compassion for yourself where you're at in your healing is really essential, because otherwise we can also skip a lot of important steps or
Mm-hmm.
miss out on a lot of important insights about our wants and our needs in relationships. So, is there something that helped you to have more compassion for yourself in the process, or kind of cultivate that ability to be present with those inner aspect, like you said, the inner children, to really kind of learn to be present with that?
Yes, and it's probably been just the experience of having an intense, heavy trigger and being with it for a few days. In the beginning, even up to a week, I would be in a trigger, like living my life, coping. And then having a session with my therapist, processing it, and coming out of it like, wow, it's resolved. It doesn't bother me anymore. I feel understanding, and I'm able. Sometimes it's something that just stops bothering you. Other times it's something that you're able to just express your boundaries around the area. You And it happened once and twice and three times and more times. And eventually my body and my psyche learned like, oh, if we're going through something really, really heavy and intense, there is a way out. It's not going to last forever. And so I think having those experiences taught me to be okay with where I'm at and be gentle with myself and be okay with coping sometimes even, you know. Um, there is a huge, I think, huge kind of understanding of, oh, if you're suppressing or if you're denying, like it's so wrong, so bad. And I mean, of course, it's not the best, it's not the ideal way to deal with triggers,
Mm-hmm.
but we really have to be realistic about where we're at and what kind of resources we have. And sometimes it is coping for 2 days, waiting for your therapy session. And that's okay. That's totally okay. Whatever. I'm really a huge fan of making the nervous system comfortable. Whatever makes it like more at ease, less overwhelmed, because doing that actually helps heal it. Like it takes a lot longer,
Mm-hmm.
but if we're constantly overwhelming our nervous system, overstimulating it, it's not gonna heal, it's not gonna grow, it's not gonna develop. But if we're gentle and taking breaks and then taking time with different healing modalities and therapists to move it forward, yeah, and then it works. It keeps healing. Mm.
Yeah, so it's in a way, it's also what you mean with like nerves is also kind of feels like for me when I listen to you, it kind of feels like a softening from
Yeah,
kind of like that transition from that hard kind of reality, or I need to figure it out, or I need to get over it now, or even I need to do it perfectly, to
yeah,
actually allowing yourself to soften a lot more
Mhm.
in that process. Because what I've also noticed a lot myself is that I'm becoming more and more softening in the experience, because even I had this mentality of like, okay, we're going to go for it. We're going to heal, at first. So to really have this harsh mentality, and I feel like the healing process is also really about allowing yourself to soften. So it's not
Yeah.
just about kind of figuring out what went wrong in the past,
Mhm.
either through different means, either more logically, mentally figuring things out, or more in the emotional process, but actually also allowing yourself to have a break from it too. Because like you said, if we're going into it too much, either mentally or really emotionally or a little bit of both, we can also overwhelm our nervous system. So that's
Mhm.
actually not beneficial to our healing. Um, because I think we live in a very, there's a lot of different cultures around the world, but kind of like the global culture right now is a lot also focused on achievement, right? And
Mhm.
kind of getting it right, and going to some type of finish line, and we have to get there as fast as possible. But usually in the long term, that kind of backfires,
Mhm.
because with healing, there is not really one specific finish line that you're like, okay, now you've completely healed. It's kind of a process, like an ongoing journey. So, what has
Yeah.
helped you to, because you already naturally, I feel like, have a very soft energy. Um, but what has helped you to soften more in that process, instead of kind of making it what I mentioned before, like a more goal oriented process?
Mm. It's such a great question because there's a whole story behind this.
Okay, I would love to
So
hear it. Yeah.
maybe maybe your listeners know about Teal Swan. I know she's our common teacher and mentor,
Hmm.
and she has this kind of like a little tool where when you make a decision, you ask softer or harder. And that was back in the time when I started becoming more embodied and having flashbacks, and that's where I kind of found that tool. And I remember spending a day asking this question. And I had a schedule. I had to go and teach. I was a teacher at the time, and I had some meetings with friends in the afternoon and some errands to do, right? So the day was kind of planned, and that was normal for me. Like the days were just the way I planned them, and then I would just execute it and just, do life kind of almost, by design. Like, okay, I have to go to work, I have to do this, I have to do that. Not in the flow, right? And I remember starting that day, I was like, okay, softer or harder. I'm just gonna check. And by the time it was evening, I had a breakdown. I started crying. I just got home and I started crying because nothing I did was soft.
Mm.
Everything was intense. It was hard. And see, the thing with it's going to be personal for each individual. It's going to be different. For someone, going to meet friends, it's going to be really really soft. For me at that time, it was just harsh. It was mental. It was planned. It was not in the flow. And that's when I realized, wow, I really have to change my lifestyle and what I'm doing every day. So little by little, I started changing what I do and choosing softer option as much as possible, and then more, and then more, and still. There is something I do every day, every morning. I kind of read out my commitments, and that's one of my commitments is to choose softer options when making decisions. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
that
was a big.
is really powerful too, for sure.
Mm,
So it's kind of, like you mentioned, just really attuning kind of to, again, feeling into your body and attuning to your emotions in the moment, and kind of tuning into what feels harder and what feels softer. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily about the action, like you said, the action itself, because it can differ per day. Maybe another day it would have felt soft to, like you said, to meet with friends. So and on one hand it can make it more complex, but on the other hand it can also make it more simple, because every time we all we have to do is really attune to our system, our body, and also kind of like your emotional body, and kind of instead of, like you said, forcing it to just do it because that's what you've scheduled, or that's what
Mm-hmm.
you had in mind or on your to-do list, or someone else wants you to do that, and kind of shifting from what really feels softer in the moment. Um,
Yeah. I wanted to add something. There were times when softer or harder was difficult to understand. So there's another option is lighter or heavier. Like what feels lighter and heavier. So I'm choosing lighter option. Just wanted to share that.
yeah, that's a good one too, because especially like that, like connecting to the senses and connecting to the body, of course, is also a process. So especially in the beginning, when we're really used to and kind of conditioned into, it's not only trauma, it's also our culture, and it kind of it's way bigger. Like I said, we inherit this kind of like from our parents, from our environment, from our teachers. This is how we live. So we really live in the head. So often when we then transition into living more in the body, it's not like, usually for most people, it's not like, okay, I'm now feeling into my body and suddenly we're able to feel everything, attuned to everything that is going on. And again, usually that's a process too. So I really love that kind of connecting to the senses of what feels lighter and what feels heavier. And do you also have like other ways of kind of reconditioning ourselves and kind of rewiring that process of um, being able to sense what we
Mm-hmm.
feel more, so we're able to connect more to that process and kind of like integrate it into our day-to-day life, so not just meditation or during yoga, because that can help, of course, but to really do that kind of, like you said, with that practice, really incorporate it into how we live our like daily life and the decisions and actions we make.
Um, One thing that just came to my mind is giving yourself time. Remembering that, as children, sometimes we didn't get a chance to even find our truth. It was, Johnny, do you want an apple and a pear or a pear, right? And then Johnny doesn't have time to decide, and mom says, okay, you're gonna have apple.
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe for her it's easier, it's already washed or whatever, right? Or other times we're not even given a choice. Parents pick out our clothes, they take us to school, to the kindergarten, they take us to play dates that we had no say in.
Mm-hmm.
So for yourself and for all the parents out there, like, we have to give ourselves choice and also give ourselves time to find the answer. And this may sound like, wow, really? There were days I would spend 2, 3 hours just sitting on my bed until I got that answer. Because I would just feel, I don't know what to do. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That kept coming up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen for different reasons. Sometimes we have trauma around knowing, so it was safer not
Mm-hmm.
to know. Sometimes, yeah, that we didn't have even experience to learn how to find our truth, how to find our needs, what we want, right? So it's almost like we have to give that to ourselves all over again. Yeah. And also remembering how, we were really just brainwashed from
Mm-hmm.
our childhood, right? So we
Yeah.
were we were in all these different programs, all these different ideas and thoughts and how to do and how to be. So, okay, then we're realizing, oh, we have to reverse this process. And because brain is just, it's just how it works. If there is a capacity to hold information, it's going to hold information. You cannot make your brain blank,
Mm-hmm.
which means you have to replace those programs, those thoughts. Like replacement will work way faster if you're just trying to kind of not do something at all, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
people, let's say, are trying to quit smoking or trying to stop overeating or trying to, stop any kind of action or habit, it's way easier if it's replaced with something that's beneficial, more nourishing, nurturing, self-loving. So what I did, I had my room full of sticky notes with new thoughts, like better thoughts. And I would kind of walk around and read them and have have them also recorded. And I would just listen to that. Because there were a lot of programming where, okay, well, it's not okay to like take care of yourself, for example. So I had to change that. I'm allowed to take care of myself. And I know if there are some listeners who are codependents or kind of came to that conclusion or realization, they'll probably relate because that's what um, codependence is where we kind of ignore our own needs to take care of everyone else's needs in hopes that they will then take care of us,
Mm-hmm.
which of course doesn't really happen like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a nutshell, kind of rewiring your brain, reprogramming with, and there are a lot of different tools. I would mention somatic experiencing as well as a very, very powerful tool. So when you have a new experience that you like, um, taking a minute or two to really let it sink into your body, really feel it, breathe, and really let your nervous system, your body, all the cells in your body learn, okay, that this is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in a way, I really love somatic experiencing too because it goes a lot more, it really includes the body in that process, right? So it kind of shifts also like because a lot of times when we want to find solutions, where that's the program, we kind of think about the solution. But a lot
Mm-hmm.
of these problems, that solution doesn't lie in more thinking, right? So it's actually about allowing ourselves to feel and really experience something, and
Mm-hmm.
really including our body in that process. And our body, in a lot of ways, is the subconscious, right? Um, it really rewires that a lot faster than just focusing on thinking different thoughts, for example. Even
Yeah.
though I think both are helpful tools, it's not like one is really better than the other. But when we really include the body, we kind of create a full experience for ourselves. And it's often also the body, that's the kind of like the process that sometimes takes a lot longer. And like we said, the memory is stored in the body. So the fastest way to change that memory is also by including the body. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can also be really literal, like we have to actually, when we're in that space, when we become aware of something, we can actually use our body physically to do certain things. Like sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's like we've never been able to set boundaries, or and then actually pushing away and even including our body and allowing it to do a pushing motion, or it can be
Mm-hmm.
helpful. Or sometimes it can be when we feel like, I had it recently that I always wanted something. That was kind of my need for certainty, and my difficulty for me with letting go was that I didn't have something to hold on to. And then I
Mm-hmm.
realized, like, going more deeply into it, and also having someone else helping me with that awareness in the process, it's like I can hold on to myself now, right? So it's also reminding yourself, okay, I'm adult now, and then actually really holding on to myself actually helped that rewiring process. a lot faster. So I don't have to think every single day. Like I can hold on to myself, or really consciously having to work on
Mm-hmm.
that. It already naturally happened because the body has experienced it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's something I wanted to also point out, that your nervous system doesn't know the difference between who you're holding on to
Mhm.
or how you're meeting the needs. So it's almost like once you identify the needs that you have that were unmet, how can you meet them? How can you simulate that experience? And sometimes it's not going to be with mom or dad a lot of the time because they're not available anymore or at all, you know?
Mhm.
So, yeah, if we can simulate, we can actually give that experience to our nervous system, to our bodies, which teaches us that we can create that. And this is where an interesting like catch 22 comes in, is like, if you can do that sometimes even by yourself, you will actually start creating experience like that with other people, with friends, maybe in a romantic connection, maybe with
Mhm.
family. So, and oftentimes we get stuck hoping and praying and wanting to, like, I don't want to do it by myself, I need someone else to give it to me, you know?
Mhm.
And yeah, of course that would be amazing, but that's what sometimes keeps us stuck in one place for a very long time.
Mhm.
So yeah, good to kind of like take that into your own hands, right? And like, okay, I'm actually powerful and I can give this to myself, and then I will be able to manifest more of that with people.
Yeah. And of course, I always find it's essential to acknowledge the need for other people because, of course, we're human.
Yes.
Um, but I feel like it's also about becoming aware and actually making those unconscious parts of us that are like inner children aware that actually we are adults now. So we don't
Mm-hmm.
literally need someone else to meet that need. And
Mm-hmm.
what it can also do is it actually can create this safety with yourself, with that
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the somatic experience, so to speak. So it feels safe with other people because sometimes it can also be like, I know that was for me, it didn't feel safe to hold on to anything, right?
Yeah.
And in the other way, and that's sometimes it can be more complex, right? So it's not safe to hold on to something, but you want to hold on to something. So that's why some of these things can be more difficult to change. And I feel like that's why having other people there witnessing your process is really helpful because it can help you to shift things like 10 times as fast than having it to
Mm-hmm.
do it by yourself. But yeah, but I think it's kind of finding the harmony in that of like, okay, these things I can meet and go through myself and actually shift myself, and this is where I want extra support in. And also that, like you said, when we kind of create that imprint within ourselves, like the somatic experience, we're a lot more likely to um, experience it also with someone else because our
Mm-hmm.
nervous system has already recorded that experience, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's safe. So sometimes it's also about shifting that, first of all, like a somatic experience, so certain feelings and certain experience can feel unsafe, to kind of transforming them into it is safe. Um, yeah, so are there also things to kind of say with the body a little here? Things that made you feel more safe being in your body? Because I also know that when we are, especially with dissociation, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
we have the tendency to move out of our body because it feels unsafe to be in your body, are there also specific things that helped you to feel more safe being in your body, um, to actually
Yeah.
start that process in the first place? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's something that we actually have to remember, that our body is wired to feel safe when we are with people.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the core wiring.
Yeah.
But if we've gone through a lot of like violent experiences where we were violated by other people, humans, then there is this almost like short circuit, right, in the brain where, well, I kind of need people, but I don't feel safe with people. So, like, what do we do, right? So what I did is I decided to live by myself, and that brought me a certain level of safety.
Mm-hmm.
And then I adopted cats, two cats, because having a living being around you is also really really good for the nervous system. Like it's another presence. And I will tell you that I could not sleep with these cats in the same room for at least 4 months. Like I would not feel safe. It took me a while to get used to them. Um, and then also seeking safe experiences with people, like in a therapeutic environment setting, or with friends that you know that are safe. And sometimes um, taking that moment when you know that you're safe logically, right, and bringing that into your body. And even right now, if you're watching this or listening this, um, are you safe where you are? Like maybe you're in your house, maybe you're on a walk, right? Taking a moment to maybe close your eyes and be like, okay, I'm safe. And you know that this knowledge is here in your head, and breathing it into your body really slowly. Like, this is what safety feels like. I'm safe. And you can do that when you are maybe taking a bath, maybe you're having a nice hot cup of tea, just kind of, you're doing something that feels nice and you know it's safe. But there will be parts of your body that don't know that. There will be, especially if you're someone who has anxiety or depression, or that feeling on edge kind of all the time, hypervigilance.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely, this is a huge, huge tool that you can do every day, a few times a day. It's just finding this moment when you are logically safe, you know that, and bringing that into your body. And breathing it in. Mm.
Yeah. Um, I really love that. It's really about like connecting to that in each moment, and that sometimes we also kind of have to remind ourselves a little bit, like, oh, this is what safety feels like. And the more kind of basically we record those
Yeah.
experiences, the stronger that safety in the body will be, because it's again what you mentioned. I think before, it's kind of replacing it, right? Replacing the program of I am unsafe with the program of I am safe. Creating
Mm-hmm.
that emotional safety, which I feel
Mm-hmm.
like is very essential. That a lot of times we want to separate these things, but actually feeling safe in a body is really about also feeling safe emotionally, and to kind of approach it more as like one thing
Mm-hmm.
can be extremely helpful. And yeah, I really want to first of all thank you for everything you shared so far. Um, yeah, and for people who are really listening to this today and they feel like, okay, this is really interesting, and I really want to um, kind of, do something more with it. So, really to allow myself to be more embodied and to create more of that safety and to process more of these different things in a safe space. Yeah, could you share maybe a little bit more about what you do, and how they can kind of continue that process, maybe even with you, if that's something they feel called or inspired to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mainly work online actually over Zoom. So I work with people from all over the world, and we do trauma recovery sessions, um, specifically working with different triggers or parts of your life that you feel you could do more. You want them to be different.
Mhm.
And I work one on one with people, and I also have a group coaching, a really deep, intensive dive. It's 4 weeks, and we meet up every day,
Mm.
and we really get to know each other and really get that sense of community. So this the intention behind this is to really entrain your body and teach your body that community is possible, it's available, and there are safe people. So if you want to join that, you can. It's every every other month I do 4 week dive
Okay,
around so.
cool. Yeah.
And you can find me lannalake.com with 2 N's. So you can contact me with that. Yeah, and yeah, let's talk. Like if anything I shared was interesting, we can for sure connect and talk and find a way for you to have some support on your healing journey. And even if it's not me, I know plenty of people who are doing different things, and so I can refer you to someone and really just find the best support for you. Oh,
Okay. Yeah, it is really great for you sharing that. And yeah, and I'll also put the link in the description. So if people are interested, it's easy for them to find. And yeah, I really want to thank you for everything you shared today. And it was lovely also connecting to you in this way, on more in a podcast format. Yeah, so do you have any last words or last things you want to share with the audience before we close it off?
um, just a reminder to be gentle with yourself and use your breath. I really believe that if everyone was breathing more, in these different intense situations, um, we would have saved more friendships and more connections. Sometimes we don't breathe and we act out and we say things we don't mean and we hurt people and hurt each other. So let's breathe more and soften up and be gentle with ourselves and with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a really great reminder. So yeah, again, thank you so much for sharing, and I also want to thank everyone for listening today. I want to wish you a wonderful week. So thank you.
Thank you so much.